Okay, now let's talk about representing hands on the turn using the board cards. When you flop a drawing hand, you should always be thinking about ways you could win the pot if you don't happen to make your draw. If you're always banking on hitting the flush or straight without ever bluffing when you miss them, then it's going to be difficult for you to show a profit with drawing hands after the flop. Let's look at an example of how to use fake extra outs to help you win more pots. With 9 players at the table and blinds of 400, 800 with a 100 ante, you call 2400 from the button with 5, 6 of hearts in a 4-way action pot. There was a raiser in first position, a middle position caller, yourself, and the big blind. Every player in the pot is deep in chips with over 100,000, let's say. The flop comes 7, 8, 3, and the initial raiser bets 5,000 on the flop. Knowing this player, you know that he will make a continuation bet a high percentage of the time, even with ace-king on a flop like that. The first player folds, and you call. The big blind folds. The turn is the jack of clubs, and your opponent checks. This is an excellent card for your hand. No, it didn't help you one bit, but your opponent has to think that if you didn't flop a set, there's a very good chance that you have 9-10 for a straight, or maybe even jack-9 or jack-10, which he still can't beat with hands like ace-8, ace-king, or king-7. Now, while you still have a draw at your straight, it isn't quite a good draw anymore, as it's unlikely that you'll be able to hit a big payday. If a 9 hits, there will be a 4-card straight on board, and even if your opponent has a big hand, he's probably not going to call unless he has the straight. Besides, the 9 might be no good to you anyway, as he could make a straight also if he just had a 10 in his hand. With 22,900 in the pot already, this would be a good situation for you to represent the straight and pick up the pot. A bet of anywhere from 10 to 12,000 should do the trick. Even if your opponent has aces, he may consider folding on the turn. If not, you're still getting a good price for your steal attempt, risking 12,000 to win 22,900. Also, even if he calls you on the turn, you might be able to steal the pot with a bigger bet on the river. Remember though, don't bluff at the river unless you're in the right situation against the right type of opponent. Let's look at a similar example in a hand that's less stressful. With blinds at 50 and 100, you decide to limp in with 9-10 of hearts from early position. Another player limps in and the button makes it 500 to go. You call, as does the other limper. Now the flop comes 7-8-4, giving you an open-ended straight draw and 2 overcards, although you're legitimately worried that the raiser has a pair of queens or better. You check to the raiser, as does the limper. The pre-flop raiser bets 1,500. You're sitting on 37,000 and your opponent has 24,000 in front of him, so you call hoping to maybe win a big pot. The other limper folds. Now the turn card is the 5 of clubs. You just have to bet that card. You have nothing and could be even drawing dead, but you have to take your chances on such a dangerous-looking card, since the way the hand has been played up until this point, you hitting that card is very believable, while it's unlikely that the pre-flop raiser liked that card. A bet of 4,000 represents about 60% of the pot and is serious enough to make your opponent consider folding an overpair. The only real risk you face here is that your opponent not only has an overpair, but he also has a club in his hand, giving him a flush draw. Well, that and, of course, ace-king of clubs, but let's hope he doesn't have that. If your opponent doesn't have a club in his hand, he'd be making a very risky call on the turn, hoping that you have the 9-10 precisely. After all, what could he beat other than that? The dilemma you'll face is on the river if he calls. Obviously, if it's a club, you're going to have to wave the white flag and give it up. If you make your straight, you can go for a value bet. If it's a blank, though, you'll have a tough decision to make as to whether or not you should bluff at it. Once again, you're really going to have to know your opponent to justify throwing any more money into this pot on the river. If you have no idea what this player would do with pocket aces on the river, you should probably conserve your chips and let him have the pot. Finally, let's look at one more example of a draw that misses, but the turn card opens up a bluffing opportunity. With blinds at 3 and 600 and a 75 ante, you've defended your big blind with ace-3 of diamonds. A tight middle position player made it 1,800 to go, and the button also called. The flop came 5, 6, 7 with 2 diamonds. You put the initial raiser on a premium hand, either an overpair, ace-king, or ace-queen. So you decide to bet the flop, trying to figure out where your opponent is at. Your opponent raises to 6,000 and you call, leaving you with 54,000 in chips. The other player folds, and the turn card is the 9 of hearts. Since you don't think your opponent has an 8 in his hand, and there was no reason why you couldn't have an 8 in your hand based on the way you played it, you should take the lead on the turn, betting anywhere from 9 to 12,000. Unless your opponent had precisely pocket 8s, how can he raise you? He really shouldn't, but if he does go all in, then you'll be forced to fold. What is likely, though, is that the bet will force your opponent to lay down pocket aces. If he does call, that's not the end of the world either, since you have outs with your flush draw. What you do on the river if he calls depends on many factors that I'll touch on in the next section.